Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820, where facts matter.
And progressive.
Joan, as always, exceptional work from you from, your TV days all the way up to today. You're truly exceptional, and thanks for this great show you have.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
I'm very pleased to welcome back once again Christopher Armitage. He writes The Existentialist Republic. Christopher, how are you?
I'm very good. How about yourself, Joan?
I'm doing pretty well. Congratulations. When I got the email that said that you were celebrating the first year of the Existentialist Republic, all I could think of was 1 year. It's only been 1 year. It feels like you've been doing this forever. It feels like we've been talking about this forever. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I've just have this strange sense of time in my life. But congratulations. Talk about, let's talk about that for a minute. When you started, why you started, and what, what about this milestone you've reached?
Yeah, I'll tell you, that feeling that you're having is not unique. So many people were saying they thought they'd been following me for years, and but I think we've lived 5 years in the last one. First of all, collectively. I've done public-facing work before. Once upon a time, I ran for Congress. I worked in politics on a bunch of different campaigns, and just was always looking for opportunities to advocate for groups and people that I believed in. And even when I was in the military, I'd still been active in ways that I could. I did a lot of charity work and did stand-up comedy, and sometimes would find ways to mix the two. And after the election in 2024, I was just decimated, destroyed, so much crying. I felt the weight of the entire world. I thought about all the unnecessary human suffering. And also, it's just, we can't play stupid here. All of us knew going into November 2024 that if Donald Trump won that election, our democracy as we knew it would likely be dead.
Well, some of us saw it, but apparently other people didn't see it, which is just staggering to me. I mean, it's not like this guy was a complete unknown the way he was in his first term. So I don't know. You saw it. I saw it. Most of the people I know saw it. But apparently the people who voted for Donald Trump had tunnel vision where they saw like one issue that they agreed with him on, and that was enough. I don't know.
Well, and I'll take a quick aside just to say that for 77 million Americans who voted for him, their beliefs, like most humans, nearly all humans, us as well, are largely determined by the beliefs of the people around them. It takes a special type of person to explore and challenge their own beliefs, the type of people who may leave a religion that they grow up in, whether it's for another religion or religion altogether, or who do, change their views based. It's not everybody asks themselves, is it possible I'm wrong? If everybody around them takes something as obvious, because even if we do that in one or two realms, it's just a practical fact that for the vast majority of us, we navigate life not challenging most things that we're told, because we can't just walk around that cynical about everything. And so to 77 million Americans, who, by the way, Donald Trump's approval ratings barely dropped. It's his approval rating is 38% if you average the top 10 pollsters as of today. And so for them, it makes sense. And breaking through that propaganda, that's part of like when I came out of was starting the Existentialist Republic. After the election, I was crushed. I knew how much unnecessary death and suffering. I knew Ukraine was going to lose funding. I knew that dictators worldwide would be empowered and given resources, that unnecessary wars would happen. Truly, just all over the world. Felt that, cried so much. Spent 3 months telling everybody, don't talk to me about politics. Local candidates and representatives and activists, people who I'd been close with for years. I told them, I was like, don't bring those things up around me. I did the period of mourning that I needed to do. And then, whether it's the work of Albert Camus or Mary Wollstonecraft, really incredible philosophers and thinkers who lived through periods of severe repression. With Mary Wollstonecraft, as a woman, she was really seeing, she shared her perspective as like women, gathering strength and empowerment to, be able to fight back against sexism and misogyny and that sort of thing. And her work, though, I was still able to, read that and say that has greater impacts, too, for all the people on Earth who, and she herself even said, any groups that are marginalized or harmed or disfranchised. And for all the work, all Americans right now who aren't oligarchs, we are victims of this regime.
Yes.
And worldwide, the human race is a victim of Donald Trump.
Amen to that.
And yeah. And so I did my period of, it wasn't weakness, but I did need to gather my strength for the people around us. And I think like parents, like you're a parent and like you need to be, you can have your pain, but also there are times where you need to gather your strength to protect the people you love as best you can.
Once you got your feet under you again, is that what led you to create the Existentialist Republic? What goals did you have for this when you first started it? I just wanted to share my journey with people, actually. I wasn't trying to start what it has become. I was starting at the base, like the most basic level of activism. I don't have really an attachment to being a public figure or something like that. I remember when I was working in politics and stuff, I got recognized once while I was at karaoke. And it was like a moment of just like, oh, do I have to like not be as silly or goofy right now, because of that. And so that, wasn't as much fun, but I started this because I just said, my Dungeons and Dragons group actually is the real reason. I told you about it before, about how I just told that we just all were stressing about politics. And that was how I found a safe space to start returning to those conversations and to activism of just saying, guys, what if we all just send an email right now before our session to the Attorney General to complain about the Epstein files, or send a message to the governor and say this, that, or the other. And then I decided to start writing, and I knew I didn't want to go to Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. No, thank you. And so I looked up different websites that allow you to publish and create an email list, and Substack and Medium were the two I went to. I didn't know anything about Medium. And then I went to Burning Man, actually, and saw as
that I
one
had an
does.
article go, as one does. And I hadn't been on the internet in a few days, and I logged in on someone's internet and saw that I had an article read by millions of people. And
wow, do you remember what you'd written in that article, what it was about?
Yeah, you're getting some real inside scoops right now. This is a story I haven't really talked about with anybody. Not usually, I like to stay focused on the work, but it's fun to talk about it, and I'm happy to. So the article was, the success rate once you elect fascists is 0% for getting rid of them democratically. Mm-hmm. That was the big, really millions of people, like very serious institutions and podcasters were talking about this article. And, it's funny, with hindsight, I realized once the public discourse around it, clearly it went viral, so it had things that really resonated with people. And there's a lot of truth to that idea that, like, once you hand over that power, if you give people the power to take away democracy, you can't just democracy your way back to it in exactly the same way. That resonated. But I also realized in time, brilliant people have discussed that article. And I think some of it is a little bit of like a no true Scotsman fallacy, where eventually it's like, how are you defining fascism? And it starts to get a little nebulous about which regimes are and are not. But it was a start. And then I just kept writing. And within a week or two, I had another article that was read by millions of people about soft secession. And I was just sharing my research about me being stressed out and saying, I'm going to research this thing. And then, I should tell people what, I'm not just going to write this and not give people something to do. because I don't do that. I research it and then I say, what can I do today? And that's a core, thing in cognitive behavioral therapy in neuroscience, is that even if it's just, cleaning up your room or something like that, like it just, making yourself some food, to make a decision to act, it tells your subconscious that you are not powerless in some tangible way. And we're in a crisis of powerlessness, more than hopelessness.
Which is why I think what you do is so important, because you don't just say, well, here's a problem and here's what I think about it. You write, here's a problem, here's what I think about it, and here's what you can do about it. And I think that is to just, it's so easy to feel helpless. Oh, I'm just one person. What I do, it's not going to matter. It's not going to make a difference. But, people have said, don't bother with economic boycotts. They don't accomplish anything. Well, they sure accomplished something at Target, where the CEO got fired because the board was like, hey, he told us that if we backed away from DEI, that we wouldn't suffer any damage. And now our sales across the country are taking a huge hit. So, it is really easy to feel powerless. And I think one of the most important things you do is tell people, you know what? Do this. You can do this, and it will make a difference.
Yeah, well, that's how I feel. Is I didn't feel like I didn't predict any of this, and it wasn't what I aimed to do. But it's kind of this thing where when you find the thing that feels like you're calling, it feels like you were circling it your whole life. And that's, when I worked in politics and when I've done public advocacy, like these are the things, even as a kid, when my dad was on city council and then went to be an HVAC repairman after that, because he was so frustrated with New Jersey politics, that all those lessons just made it so that once I just started writing things for the general public, it really clicked with people. And I know folks like Tom Hartman have been for decades. They'll tell people, like, call the switchboard for Congress and that kind of thing.
Yep.
And I remember sitting in the car with my mom at 8 years old between 2000 and 2004, when we went from Republican Mormons to atheist socialists, and listening to Air America. And my mom and me would talk about what, people like Tom were talking about on Air America. And, so it's just, I don't know, what the things that I was just doing for myself and thinking about and sharing. And I've always loved policy. That's one of the things, that's politicians in Washington State do, representatives do call me for years, because but the things I'm telling my readers, like I'm suggesting and telling that I do, that's how I got to the point where I have this wealth of information, is like, a city councilman, in Jersey, who then, is a working class blue collar guy after that. He's telling his son his frustration. And then his mom is suddenly getting really into politics too, and sharing these things. And all of a sudden, 12 years old, my parents are giving me, the Common Sense by Thomas Paine and, the Communist Manifesto. And that was like dinner table conversation.
So much of, I think, who we turn out to be are exposures like that, discussions like that. My mom and dad didn't usually talk about politics because they were, shall we say, on opposite sides. All I can remember is every time there was an election day, my mom would look at me and she'd say, well, I gotta vote today. I gotta cancel out your dad. So we didn't have, my parents, shall we say, weren't on the same page politically. So there wasn't a lot of political discussion in my house, but they always voted. There was never a voting opportunity that they were just like, it's not important. It was always something that had to fit into their schedule that day somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's that important. That stuff is formative. That's why, like, when I reflect on like the journey that's brought me to where I am today, so much of it was that childhood too, where I saw my parents change their minds, and not only that, but even, when it came to religion, like I said, we left the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We left the Mormon Church, and
as a family,
my mom's first, as a family, yeah.
Because I know a lot of times
my
kids grow up
yeah.
and they look at the religion they were raised in and say, you know what, that just doesn't make sense or that doesn't work for me. But an entire family, that's unusual.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and my parents, so they left space for us. If we wanted to go to church or something, we could go to any church we wanted. We could fall into, if I wanted to be a little Republican when I was 13, we would have had some very heated debates, but my parents wouldn't have belittled me. It would have been like real conversations about those things. And that, like, me and my siblings were just always given that space. Like, you better bring facts. You better back up what you believe, and we're going to challenge it. But and then so as an adult, though, I've always showed up and had these conversations and tried to talk to people and be involved. And then eventually after the Trump stuff, I just, and I remember too, like Black Lives Matter, getting involved in that and helping out. And that, forming for me, like my decision to walk away from law enforcement, and kind of helping to even expand my understanding of that situation. And, but it didn't all come together until I just started writing on Substack. And then all of a sudden people it took like 3 weeks before I had a viral article, and then another one within a week or two. And, I had like 5 million readers a month pretty quickly. But I'm just writing about, I just research things and try to share expert opinions and my understanding of them. And then,
that's what I think sets you apart, Christopher, is, there's a lot of people who will write about, this is happening and I don't like it. But you write it from almost a research point of view. Here's an idea. This is where it seems to have come from. This is what it's actually, the results of it are. And this is how we can undo it, repeal it, or fight it. It's not just, you're not just opining, oh, this happened and isn't it terrible? And don't we all feel bad about this? You give, as a reader, you give me something. You educate me and you give me a way to have some of the power to undo the wrongs that we all see. I think that's what sets you apart, and I think you're being way too modest here. Anyway, I wanted to congratulate you on that first year. If I don't get to a commercial break, Lady B is going to beat me up. So Christopher Armitage and I will be right back after this.
Because facts matter. You are listening to WCPT 820.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Every weekday afternoon from 2 to 5 p.m. on WCPT 820.
Christopher Armitage writes The Existentialist Republic. The easiest place to find it is on Substack. You should subscribe because it is one of the most interesting and cutting-edge publications that you are going to find on Substack. There's so much I want to talk to you about what you've written, but real quick, I have to go back and touch on, you were a stand-up. At what point in your life did you do stand-up comedy? And did I know that about you before? I'm not sure I did.
No, I found something. It was an opening act, like 10 minutes. And I would often cry after performances.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That was mean. I didn't mean that. It just came out.
It's okay. I'm a comedian. It's okay to laugh. I love comedy. I did it for like a decade. It's the only like online stuff about it is if you Google who says cops have no sense of humor, Air Force, you will find an article about Senior Airman Christopher Armitage, who does stand-up comedy. And I did, so it's okay to laugh. You know what's funny is I didn't ever do terribly, but even after like a decade of doing it on the and really trying post-military to see if I could kind of make it work by performing a lot and getting invited regularly to open up for comics who'd go on the road because they know I would drive 2 hours to do 10 minutes for no money. I would cry because I would get laughs. I could get laughs, but I would feel like I'm mediocre. They weren't big laughs. And I just the frustration of that after years of stand up, I was like, okay, it's okay for this to not be my thing. And I mean, public communication is what I do for a living still now. I drive around the country and fly around the country speaking in front of crowds for like sometimes an hour. I was just in the Yakima Valley of Washington and talked about my work, and I get laughs. I get a lot of laughs for someone who works in politics, just not enough for someone in comedy.
Yeah. Well, you know, especially when I lived in downtown Chicago, I used to love to go to a comedy club and hear stand-up. And one thing that always amazed me is that there were so many stand-ups who were really, really, really good and really, really funny. Like, you know, everything they did landed and the timing was perfect. And yet there would be names you've never heard of before and you've never heard of since. It is so hard, even if you are really good at that job, it is so hard to break through and become like a Mike Birbiglia or somebody like that who's, you know, doing Broadway stages or somebody like a Kevin Hart who ends up doing stadiums. It is, to me, I've never been able to figure out why some people break through and they don't, because I saw so many people doing stand-up who did it incredibly, intelligently, hilariously. And I can't tell you any of their names because I didn't know them before I walked in, and they've never gotten any kind of real national headlines since. So I don't think you should beat yourself up. I mean, it's a wildly, I mean, of all the professions in the world, you know, I used to be in television news and be an anchor. And people used to say, oh, it's such a hard profession to be successful in. And to some degree, they were true because there was only, you know, there was a very limited number of jobs. They weren't necessarily making any new TV stations. But compared to what I did was a piece of cake compared to trying to make it as a stand-up. So I think that you should cut yourself some slack. And just the fact that you didn't become a headliner doesn't mean you weren't good.
I appreciate it. And that's the thing. I had friends, you know, who were comedians who were like, that was good. Why are you so upset? And I just, you know, but I think sometimes we feel a draw to something. And then also there's an understanding of like recognizing where your skills are. And that's, I've always loved politics and stuff. I think part of like public communication and public policy is just, gosh, it can be heartbreaking sometimes. And that's kind of the push and pull of it. But I can't say that everything didn't work out for the best, because ultimately when I look at my life now, the work I do, it is so rewarding in a way where I can't imagine myself doing anything else at this point, really. Yeah. You know, and even then, you know, like I said, even when I did comedy and stuff, I was always, you know, involved in fundraisers when I was in the military, and post-military involved in politics. And, you know, we can't do, Joan, I'll tell you, one of the biggest frustrating things for me, as ridiculous as this is going to sound, it's just that I can't do it all. Said one of the most overachieving human beings that I've ever had the pleasure of talking to. You are so self-aware. That is a beautiful thing about you. Christopher, we need to take another break because I took the last one too late. Christopher Armitage, I swear to God, I really do want to talk about what he's written about, and I promise you we will do that when we come right back after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
And with me is Christopher Armitage, who writes the Substack Existentialist Republic. A while back, he and I talked because he had initiated a Barr investigation into Chief Supreme Court Justice John Roberts for misconduct. But he didn't stop with John Roberts. Now he has focused, laser beam focus on Clarence Thomas. Tell us about that, Christopher.
Yes. So based on conduct in the public record that Justice Thomas has been involved in, there is sufficient evidence to draft and submit articles of impeachment. So the Existentialist Republic We put together articles of impeachment with 6 different articles within it for different conduct violations. I mean, those are pretty in the record about, ethics violations where he's receiving gifts from people with vested interests that later appear before his court, along with his wife, Ginny Thomas's activities in facilitating a failed insurrection, or, well, maybe it's delayed success. And so we put those articles together. We used previous articles of impeachment, including a set that were actually related to financial crimes that are materially identical to what Justice Thomas is doing. A federal judge was actually impeached by Congress and convicted and removed in 2010. And so we were able to actually take the same conduct and just plug in Justice Thomas's conduct. We put those together, and now our volunteers are sending those out to representatives across the country and saying, just because, even if you're in the minority, or even if, the upcoming midterms give you a slim majority, not enough to convict in the Senate, we want these articles of impeachment on the public record, and that should allow investigations into Justice Thomas. It should allow for him to be brought in for an impeachment investigation and trial, for him to be under subpoena, for him to potentially perjure himself. And that opportunity is there for us. We want to hand tools to every single person, whether it's the individual, a state legislator, or a member of the U.S. House or a member of the U.S. Senate. Everybody has a job in fighting against fascism, and nobody ever gets to say, what can I do? And so right now, that's what we want from our U.S. House members. So we drafted the articles of impeachment for them. Now, previously also, Representative AOC drafted articles of impeachment against Thomas in 2024. And so we were also able to include some of that.
Interesting. Is that who has standing to bring these impeachment charges? Does it have to be a member of Congress? Is that why you are sharing this with them?
Yes, it has to be members of the U.S. House. And so we're pushing hard to let our representatives know that even without a conviction, the evidence that can be gained from a House impeachment investigation, it's not just Thomas. I mean, all of them should. And even articles of impeachment were brought up by Jimmy Raskin against the Chief Justice, Roberts. And we need to continue to press on these. We need to get every Democrat voting for them. We need to continue to bring them up. We need to do it after the midterms as well, because I do think it's realistic that Democrats gain a majority in the House. And then even if this administration doesn't, we know we're not going to get a conviction. We're not going to win enough in the U.S. House to remove somebody. But
does a conviction take 2/3?
It does, yeah.
That's too bad.
And yeah, it would need not just to be a once-in-a-generation landslide. It would need to be defeating the amount of cheating that's going on, which means how many points are you shaving off? But the information we gain from that, 1, you're taking up their time and energy. 2, and that takes them away from fascism. 2, you are actually gaining evidence that could later be used for criminal, prosecutions or be referred to states. In the process of impeaching Alito, Roberts, Thomas, you can gain evidence of state crimes should that evidence exist. And you can hand that to states that may then prosecute. This puts them in the hot seat. I want these people stressed out. I want fascists deeply concerned that no matter who is president, they are on the line for their conduct, and justice could come anytime. And that's part of how we do it.
Well, you're absolutely right, because Trump's prosecution, his relentless prosecution of James Comey, I have said this before on the radio. I don't think Trump cares what the eventual outcome is. I think the process, the emotional toll, the financial toll is exactly the point. And I don't see why, what's good for the goose can't be good for the gander.
Absolutely. Well, they're exactly right. And that's where I got this idea. By the way, Republicans have done over twice as many impeachment trials over the last 30 years as Democrats. And that's because no matter even what they do it for silly reasons, I want us to do it for legitimate reasons. Because guess what? Even if by some chance a scandal of considerable enough proportions comes out from any of the impeachments of any of these justices, well, then the impeachment happens, the conviction happens, you remove them. People say, well, Trump will just put Eileen Cannon on the bench or something like that. Go ahead and let them. We'll impeach her too. Is she ready to have her life ruined as a result of her actions, as a lawful result of her actions? Is every other judge on the federal bench and in the Supreme Court ready for the same? Bring it. Sounds like a great way to get more people out who should not be in those positions.
Now, I know this exists. The impeachment process exists. Here's what are impeachable offenses, and here's the process to bring about an impeachment. But I was racking my brains. If I don't think during my lifetime I've seen a Supreme Court justice impeached. Has it ever happened?
It has happened once, actually, in the 1800s. It was over financial crimes as well. Now, but I'll also say, I bring up precedent because one of the most powerful things you can do in a court of law, or in really any argument or disagreement, is to bring up examples in the past where the same sort of conduct resulted in the outcome that you think should happen, right? And also find the rules that say that this is what should happen. And the important thing here is that we actually have to start a new precedent of accountability, because we have a real bad precedent of these people being above the law because they want to take care of each other, and that's not going to fly. And no matter what letter is next to your name, we need to set that new precedent, because an important detail here is the difference between what is normally done and what is binding. Precedent is not binding. We can change precedent anytime we want, because slavery was a precedent for a long time. Plenty of other things, racism, slavery, women not being allowed to vote, plenty of bad things. And the only way you get change is by setting a new precedent. And the new precedent that we have to demand from our representatives at every level, even when they know it's going to fail. I don't care if we're not going to get a conviction. There are things to be gained by putting these people, they're the frogs in the water, and we got to get it boiling. We got to dial up the heat in as many different ways as we can. So we have a new era of judicial and political, accountability to create. And that actually rolls into another project that we just launched. In the next week, we're going to be mailing out about 1,700 physical packets, and then also sending out around 3,400 emails. And we're going to be sending out the bill that the Existentialist Republic recently published, the Make Corrupt Politicians Pay Act. Now, what this would do is make it so that you personally could sue Donald Trump, and even an attorney general could prosecute him criminally if you owned a stock or product that he used insider information from his government position to profit off of and manipulate. And that goes for any politician.
Well, so it's pretty much everything Donald Trump has done would come under the purview of this law, because at least in his first term, he had the decency to pretend when he was grifting that it wasn't grifting. Now he doesn't even care. Hey, corporations, give me $100,000 a month and I'll give you access early to stuff I'm going to post on social media. What you do with that information is up to you, but I certainly would do some insider trading if it were me. Yeah, I think that's a wonderful law.
We can personally, the country, the people, not class action lawsuits, individuals, or if they want to team up, can sue an AG in defense of the people, criminally and civil. And also, every part of this bill, by the way, every part of this law is built from existing laws that have long-standing precedent. Every single piece of it is robust to judicial challenges. This could mean that from him, his whole family, and any other corrupt politician can be sued for triple damages of what they gained unlawfully.
Are you going to send these packets to members of Congress or AGs or what?
State. We're sending them to every single governor. We're sending them to every Democrat state representative. We are sending them to state Democrat Party chairs, and our volunteers will also be reaching out to individual chapters and to county Democrat organizations to request that they endorse this legislation, contact their members, and contact their state representatives, anyone they've endorsed, and say, if you want to continue to be endorsed by us, or if you want to be endorsed by us in the future, you must endorse this legislation publicly.
It would seem that a lot of the work you do would go hand in glove with a progressive agenda. Have you found progressive legislators to be more receptive to your ideas?
Certainly. Yeah, that's definitely true. But that's just the lane that doesn't take money. And you know my feelings on the word progressive. I call it common sense. I call it ethical. Way different than being outside the norm. To me, I don't know what moderate means in comparison, because someone who takes money from, from foreign nations, hostile foreign nations, from companies that commit war crimes. Google helps commit war crimes. They had a report they received that they paid for, that said, if you make this contract with Israel, you are likely going to facilitate war crimes with the technology that you provide for them. And they chose to do that anyway. And so whatever you call yourself politically, if you take money from businesses and from bad actors and the organizations, any organization that just wants to subvert the will of the American public, because what does the American public want? Well, 80% of them want Medicare for all. 74% of them want a $20 minimum wage. Like, these are wildly popular policies. So you're being paid to subvert the will of the American public. If you found me a Republican who rejected corporate money and still believed the things they believe, I would just be concerned about, their mental state, I guess, for a lot of reasons. But I guess I'd still have some respect for that. Gosh, because it's like, I guess you sincerely believe these horrible things you believe. You're not just being paid to believe them.
Yeah, absolutely. This is completely tangential, but we are talking about the kind of lawmakers who are receptive and people who can actually get things done. Real quick before we go to break, I'm starting to read more and more people who are questioning whether or not Hakeem Jeffries will continue to be the leader of the Dems if they take a majority in the House of Representatives. Like, supposedly he was Nancy Pelosi's hand-picked person to be Speaker, but it turned out that he didn't get the opportunity to be Speaker, an opportunity that may be coming around, but he's now taking a lot of heat. Do you think he has the support, the backing, the ideas to be voted in as Speaker if and or when the Dems take control of the House of Representatives?
I think it's likely that he is made Speaker. I think that's the more likely outcome. And that's because, you don't become the Speaker because you're good at fighting Republicans. You become the Speaker because you are good at navigating the party establishment. His views do not align with the majority of Democrats. It means he's a bad Speaker in my book. That just feels like it should be the baseline, right? But I do believe that it's likely that he's going to be. He's very successfully navigated himself out of having a primary challenger, behind the scenes. And this isn't something I've received on the record. It's just from knowing people in the campaigns and the administrations in New York. Part of how AOC and Mamdani have stepped out of the way and even discouraged someone from primarying Jeffries from the left is because he was able to broker and make arrangements with Governor Hochul and between AOC and Mamdani to basically say, okay, if you guys help make sure that I have the path cleared for me, the party establishment is going to help you, whether it be, AOC being able to have more influence to further, the very legitimate positive platform that she has. And same for, Mamdani. He needs Governor Hochul on board to get a lot of his platform completed. And so it's effective political moving within the party. I would like for somebody else to be the Speaker. But there are just these pragmatic facts of politics that are very difficult to get around. And I could be wrong. I'd like to be. And I can tell you what has to happen. I'd like to tell you what has to happen for me to be wrong is the Progressive Caucus is now the second largest House caucus. When the Progressive Caucus is the largest House caucus, they'll probably be able to swing their weight around and have a House Speaker who really represents what the majority, it is moderate, centrist, majoritarian, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. The platform claimed by the progressives is just what the majority of Americans, and especially the majority of Democrats, want. If the Progressive Caucus can be the largest caucus for the House Dems, they'll get to pick who takes that seat.
Christopher Armitage writes, the Existentialist Republic. He and I are taking a break. We'll be back with more after this.
Hey, Google, play WCPT.
Streaming Chicago's progressive talk from TuneIn.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Joining me is Christopher Armitage. You should look up the Existentialist Republic on Substack, especially if you are trying to figure out how you can make a difference in your state and in your country in politics. Are you planning to get involved in the midterms in any way, like and getting out there and pounding the pavement for a particular candidate, or trying to get people registered, or trying to encourage voter turnout, or handing out bulletproof vests in the polling places where ICE is liable to show up? I don't know. What are your plans for the midterm? She said, as a very long-winded way of finally getting to her question.
I'm honestly doing no work at all around the midterms. All the projects that me and the Existentialist Republic are working on are really about the 2027 legislative sessions in states. The Existentialist Republic has put out 8 different bills. These have been reviewed by constitutional law experts, by voting rights experts, and we are. The midterms can go how they're going to go. I mean, maybe Trump declares, I don't think this is the most likely outcome, but he declares a national emergency. And I think even the governors that we might like will probably just announce the lawsuits, So this kind of, just to go a little tangential for a second, you asked about, you mentioned appreciating my process about the way we construct our articles and our campaigns, and then that I do. And it's really built on trying to orient towards reality as effectively as possible. Somebody recently told me they appreciate my optimism. I'm not an optimist. I'm a pessimist with a good attitude. I think there's a really strategically beneficial, there's strategic benefit having a good attitude. I see our situation right now as being, military is my background. We're surrounded by, hostile forces, pinned down. We've taken some losses, but you don't just lay down and give up. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean you can't win either. You got to acknowledge the terrain that you're in and make a plan, and it's got to be a dang good one, and you want to get out of there, and you want to get your buddies out of there. And that's the situation we're in. My honest take, everybody's got to vote. Please, I will happily vote. I'm going to call all my best friends and tell them to vote on Election Day. Most articles I mention, hey, get out there and vote. But the work I'm doing is to make sure that at the state level, we can pass laws that put Donald Trump in handcuffs, that protect our elections, that put ICE agents in handcuffs for the crimes that they've committed, that will allow us to essentially prosecute the war crimes happening in our own country over the coming years. But I see it all happening at the state level, the federal government. Once it's been purged and loyalty tested, what do you do then? So a new administration comes in with a bunch of MAGA people in every department. Every department is underfunded. Our budget is destroyed. We don't have the money to depurge and to reconstruct a federal government. Really, that's just where we are right now.
Well, I attended a panel discussion with one of the speakers was Mike Carbonargi, who was ahead of one of the regional offices under Biden. And even then, he talked about how if indeed Trump dismantles all the departments or attempts to, the way we saw in his first term, which of course he has done, he said Democrats will eventually retake power. And one thing that people should be talking about right now, well, he didn't call it Project 2029, but I do, is how should these departments be rebuilt? Because he pointed out that he was, I don't know if he was Health and Human Services or what regional director, but he said, Joe Biden made this great announcement that he was going to negotiate some drug prices and get some of drugs that people use all the time, get better pricing. And he said that was great. And the first group of drugs was 8 drugs. But he said it took us to negotiate a better price for 8 drugs, took us 15 months. Because, we had public comment, and then, we had our proposal, and then the drug companies could rebut our proposal, and then we rebutted their rebuttal, and they rebutted our rebuttal. And he said, Biden's Biden was still president then, but we already knew that Trump had been elected. And he said, 8 drugs. That was all. That was all that he accomplished, was lowering the prices for 8 drugs, because it basically took a year and a half to negotiate 8. And he's like, you know what? He said, I understand. He said, I think public comment is important. I think give and take is important. But it shouldn't have taken a year and a half for 8 drugs. And as a result, those were the only 8 drugs that got their prices lowered in the Biden administration. There was another set of 8 that they were ready to go on, but there was no time. And he made a good point that if Trump tears everything down, we better not only just figure out how to rebuild it, but how to rebuild it better and more efficiently and more responsibly, so that everything, because that's one of the problems with Democrats. It's like, how do you feel? Well, how do you feel? Let's have a meeting next week. Oh, do you feel differently now? Okay, then let's have a meeting in another 2 weeks, because, we want everybody to weigh in as many times as possible. So it takes us forever to get anything done. And I would like to see that change, Christopher.
Well, I think the Mamdani effect is the answer, but it's not going to happen at the federal level. If Obama, I know there's a lot of progressives who don't have and I have my qualms with Obama and Biden both. But ultimately, the reason I would never want to be president is because Obama and Biden couldn't get it done. He had a couple big wins, but if you measure the amount of successes and progress under Obama and Biden versus the amount of destruction under Bush and Trump, the backsliding happens orders of magnitudes more rapidly and is not undone. And so I just don't see a situation. We're not a more democratic nation than we were 30 years ago. Once Citizens United passed, and then Project Red Map with gerrymandering, these problems have gotten substantially worse. Unless a Democrat is elected and decides to be a dictator, it can't happen at the federal level, because it would require cooperation from Republicans who know that if they just dig their heels in, it'll be 4 years of a Democrat failing to fix these problems, and then America will elect a Republican again to make us slide back further. So I'm not working on the midterms. What I'm working on is the fact that 16 Democratic trifecta states should have single-payer universal health care, or at least a public option that's revenue generating. They should have public banks that can fund public works projects. I'm writing an article right now called The State's New Deal. It's about the New Deal as implemented through cities and states, because that's what we can do today. We don't have to wait for the midterms. We don't have to wait for elections. We don't have to try and, turn, Texas into a democracy, because they're not. We can get these things done now. And anywhere Democrats hold power, that's how they can really show that they're about it, because that's not going to stop us from fixing things. In fact, every single piece of progress this country has ever made, to include the New Deal, whether it was women's suffrage or ending slavery or union, or organized labor, anything we've ever succeeded in doing, gay marriage, legalizing cannabis, did it start at the federal government? No. Every single one of those things started at the state level. And so if we can't pass universal health care, if we can't put corrupt politicians in jail, if Democrats can't do that in the states and cities they control, then I have zero faith that they will do it should they control the White House or Congress. And that's where they have to prove themselves.
Well, you make a great point. And I think not only are the states the place we should be focusing right now, but I think that for the average voter, you understand a little bit more about, your local municipality and your state government and your local judges really have more to do with the way you live your life than whoever you've sent to Congress or whoever you've sent to the Senate. I think people are waking up to that. And the fact that because of people like you, people like the States Project, people like the Courier Newsroom group are telling the people over and over again, hey, don't take your eye off of what's happening in the state. This is where you should be looking and where you should be working. And I think that's perfect. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, well, and the progress is coming. I'm telling you, especially as we send out these thousands of emails and thousands of packages, we're working to create sort of a pro-democracy distributed ALEC to connect indivisible chapters, to connect county Democrat groups, to hand them the most effective strategies, the most effective demands. Just to, I've done so many events over the last year, and like from speaking to a class of Yale students to rural communities from North Carolina to Philadelphia to Washington and to Washington State. And over, people just feel like they've been doing the activism for years, and it's only gotten worse. But at the state level, your average individual chapter in these small towns has like 200 members. Meanwhile, the Republicans running for the state house are running unopposed. 200 volunteers can get anybody elected. They could get somebody elected who says this state is, I will not take the state. I will not take no for an answer on getting this community universal health care, on getting us public banking, on getting us, everything that we need for freedom and justice from this state, from not just civil suits against Trump and his family, but actual material consequences for the people who are destroying this country, to investigate the Epstein files. You can vote for somebody for governor who says, we are going to build a task force to investigate the Epstein files. That is legal. That is within their powers. Your governor could do a state of emergency today to start a New Deal style jobs program, to start, to build hospitals that don't even have billing departments. That could happen today.
Yep. Christopher Armitage, thank you once again for being here. Congratulations on the anniversary of the Existentialist Republic. You're doing great work, and I am so pleased that you join us to share it with us.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate you having me as always.
You're very welcome.